The wooden practice sword cracked against the post so hard that splinters flew across the wet cobblestones. And still Urzoth Ashwalker did not open her eyes. She had been at it for 2 hours in the rain. Elijah Chandler knew this because he had arrived at the crossroads 2 hours ago, and she had been there when he pulled his mule through the gate. A tall, green-skinned orc woman in the stable yard, eyes shut, moving through a fighting form he had never seen before. He had unsaddled his mule, eaten half a bowl of lamb stew, and come back outside to refill his water flask from the pump, and she was still at it, eyes still closed. Rain sheeted sideways off the eaves of the inn stable, pooling in the ruts between the cobblestones, soaking through his travel coat. Elijah stood under the overhang with his flask and watched her, because it was either that or go back inside to the innkeeper, who had already tried to sell him 3 remedies Elijah himself had blended and could see were watered-down replicas. The woman was extraordinary. That was simply the truth of it. She stood just shy of 6 feet, built like a sculptor's dream of what a warrior ought to be, lean-muscled arms, broad, capable shoulders, a waist that curved sharply beneath a fitted vest of dark brown leather, laced tight from hip to collarbone with crossed rawhide cord. She wore close-fitted leather riding trousers tucked into battered but well-oiled knee boots, and a short-sleeved practice shirt of heavy linen beneath the vest, damp from the rain and pressed flat against her. Her dark hair was pulled up in a high, tight knot, and a single bone bead threaded at the nape of her neck clinked softly every time she moved. She had the lower tusks of her orcish heritage, short and sharp, rising just past the curve of her lower lip, and her features were strong and clean high cheekbones, a wide, serious mouth, heavy brows drawn together in concentration beneath closed lids. Her eyes were shut. They had been shut for 2 hours. She moved as though the rain and the yard and the whole sodden world around her did not exist. Strike, pivot, guard, drop, rise. The wooden sword sang through the air with the efficiency of something sharpened to a single deadly purpose. Elijah watched her miss, and miss badly, when the post shifted on its base from the force of her last strike. She corrected. She missed again. Her jaw tightened. She moved back to the start of the form and began again with her eyes closed. He should have gone inside. He was a traveling herbalist and field healer with 17 miles of mud road still ahead of him tomorrow, and he was not in the business of inserting himself into strangers' training regimens. He had a contract with the garrison at Ashfield Keep to deliver a month's supply of wound salve, fever-reducing tincture, and dried lungwort, and the contract would not wait for him to stand in the rain watching a woman fight with her eyes shut. He went inside for dry socks instead, and sat near the fire. He was still there an hour later when Urzoth Ashwalker came through the door. She filled the doorframe in a way that made 3 of the 4 men at the nearest table look up, and made 2 of them look away. The rain had darkened her hair and plastered the linen shirt to her shoulders. She shook water from her hands with the unself-conscious thoroughness of someone who lived mostly outdoors, took the nearest open stool, and said to the barkeep, "Ale. The good barrel, not the one you water." The barkeep gave her a look that contained a great deal of unspoken opinion about orc women drinking in his establishment, and she met it with a look that contained nothing at all, just flat, patient attention, as though she were watching an insect decide whether or not to be interesting. He got her the ale. Elijah was 2 stools down. He said, without looking up from the yarrow root he was trimming, "You're shifting your weight to your right heel before you strike. That is why you keep missing the post when it moves." Silence. He looked up. She was staring at him, not with anger exactly, but with the specific expression of a person recalibrating their initial read of a situation. "I beg your pardon," she said. "The post, it shifts left because you hit it heavier on the right side, but your balance is already committed right before you even swing. You cannot correct for movement you have already decided not to anticipate." Her chin lifted half an inch. Her tusks caught the firelight. "You watch me for quite a while for a man who looks like a herbalist." "I am a herbalist. I can also observe things." He set down the yarrow root. "My name is Elijah Chandler. I was born watching. It is a flaw." Something crossed her face. not quite amusement, something in the neighborhood of it passing through on its way somewhere else. "Urzoth Ashwalker," she said, "and you are wrong. I know where my weight is. You know where it is when your eyes are open. That is a different problem." She stared at him for another moment. Then she took a long pull of ale, set the cup down with precision, and said, "And what problem exactly is that? You fight with your eyes closed because you are trying to develop sense memory for your forms, which is excellent training. But if you wait one side before the swing, and you are closing your eyes so that you cannot see the feedback from what happens afterward, then you are reinforcing the error. You are training yourself to be wrong, just very confidently." The silence that followed this was longer than the first one. "You are," Urzoth said slowly, "a remarkably forthcoming herbalist. People tell me that. It is not a compliment. I know, they tell me that too." Something in her jaw shifted. The almost amusement was back. She turned to look at him fully, not the polite half-attention she had been giving him while she organized her opinion of him, but a full, direct look, the kind that took stock. Her eyes were amber, he saw, a deep, warm amber like pine resin held up to a candle. Striking in a face otherwise made of angles. "You are not afraid of me," she said. "Should I be? Most of the humans in this room would have very much preferred that I drink somewhere else." He glanced around. 2 of the 4 men from the nearest table had in fact relocated to the far end of the room. Elijah had not noticed this happening, which was probably telling. "I have worked with orc healers," he said. 2 of them. Burned River Clan, about 8 years ago, after the border skirmishes ended. They taught me 3 things about wound management that have saved more lives than everything I learned at a physics apprenticeship. I have found it generally useful to not be afraid of people who know things I do not." Urzoth was quiet for a moment. "Burned River," she said. "That was a bad season." "It was. You were young. I was 19, too young to know the things I did not know." He picked up the yarrow root again. "Were you there?" "No," she looked at the fire. "But I knew people who were a beat. My mother." He did not say he was sorry. He had learned early in his work among people who carried grief that "I am sorry" was often more about the speaker's discomfort than the listener's pain. Instead he said, "She must have been formidable." Urzoth looked back at him, and this time the expression that crossed her face was specific and unguarded for just a moment's surprise and something warmer beneath it, before she locked it back behind that flat, assessing calm. "She was," she said. "Yes." He nodded and went back to trimming yarrow. She finished her ale in silence, and the silence was the comfortable kind. The next morning broke gray and cold over the crossroads town of Millhaven. Elijah was up before dawn, as was his habit on travel days, restocking his saddlebags at the market stalls before the real traffic clogged the lanes. He was haggling with a dried herb seller over the price of dried valerian when he heard a commotion at the far end of the market square. He heard it before he could see it, a sharp collective intake of breath, then the lower, uglier sound of men working themselves up to something. He paid for the valerian without finishing the haggle, pocketed it, and moved toward the sound. In the center of the market square, 3 men had Urzoth Ashwalker backed against the side of a provision wagon. Not with weapons, not yet, but with the specific kind of body positioning that is its own threat, shoulders forward, weight forward, 3 to 1. She had her arms at her sides and her chin level. She had not moved back. From the way her hands were resting, Elijah could see she had already decided what she would do if they took one more step. The nearest man, heavy-set with a dockworker's hands, was saying something about orc filth and the right of honest people to use the market without breathing the same air as, and the words after that were not the kind of words that required repeating. Elijah walked directly into the gap between the nearest man and the wagon without breaking stride. He was not a large man. He was medium height, lean from years on the road, with a healer's quick, careful hands and a traveler's weathered face. He carried no visible weapon. He stood in the gap and said calmly to the heavy-set man, "Excuse me, I need to get by." The man turned. "What?" "She owes me," Elijah said. He looked back at Urzoth with the expression of a man who is inventing something quickly and hoping it will hold together. 4 silver, for medicines, and I need to speak to her about it, today. Urzoth said nothing. She looked at him with those amber eyes, and they were currently unreadable in a very specific way, like a text in a language he was being told he had approximately 10 seconds to learn. The heavy-set man said, "You do business with an orc." "I do business with anyone who pays," Elijah said, "and she owes me 4 silver. He turned to Urzoth. "About that payment." Urzoth held his gaze for one more beat. Then she said, her voice entirely level, "Yes. I was going to find you this morning." She looked at the heavy-set man, and her eyes were warm amber and completely, utterly calm. "If you will excuse us." The man held his ground for another moment, long enough to feel he had made his point, probably, or to convince himself that he had, and then the group of them broke apart with the kind of low muttering that men do when they are backing down and want to call it something else. Elijah and Urzoth walked away from the wagon together. They walked in silence until they turned the corner onto the narrower lane behind the market, and then Urzoth stopped walking. She turned to face him. He stopped. 4 silver, she said. "I needed a number." "You could have walked past." "Yes, a beat. Why didn't you?" He looked at her. He had asked himself the same question approximately 3 seconds after he had inserted himself into the situation, and the best answer he had managed was that it had seemed obvious, which was not, he understood, an entirely satisfying answer. "It seemed wrong to walk past," he said, "and I had already talked to you. That makes a difference somehow. Once I know a person exists as a person, I find I cannot look away from things that are happening to them." Urzoth looked at him for a long moment. The morning light was cold and clear, and it fell across her face without mercy, and she was striking in it, that strong jaw, those amber eyes, the gleam of her tusks in the pale light. "You are a strange man, Elijah Chandler," she said. "This is becoming a pattern," he said. "People telling me that." The corner of her mouth moved, just barely. "Come," she said, "I will buy you breakfast, since apparently I owe you money." He had not expected that. "You do not have to. I know I do not have to." She was already walking. "Come." Over flatbread and eggs at a cook stall on the edge of the market. He learned that Urzoth was a contract warrior, a mercenary, effectively, though she used the word contractor with the deliberateness of someone who had decided on that word specifically and would not be moved from it. She took on work from garrison commanders, trade road security companies, and occasionally private parties with legitimate needs for skilled protection. She had been at Millhaven for 2 weeks waiting on a contract that had, as of yesterday, collapsed when the hiring merchant turned out to have significantly overestimated both his budget and the nature of his actual problem, which was not bandits but a grain dispute with his neighbor that required a magistrate rather than a sword. Elijah told her about the supply contract with Ashfield Keep, which was a 3-day ride east on increasingly rough road that skirted the edge of the Greyfen Marshes. He told her this because she asked, and because he found, to his mild surprise, that he wanted to talk to her. She listened the way very few people listen, not waiting for her turn to speak, but actually attending. "The Greyfen Road," she said when he had finished. "Yes. I have heard there is something wrong on that road." He paused. "What kind of something wrong?" "The specific kind that leaves no bodies." She broke off a piece of flatbread. 3 trading wagons went missing in the last month. A courier, 2 drovers with their horses. She looked up. No bodies, no wreckage, just gone. He had heard the rumor at the inn last night, in the blurred background of other people's conversations. He had filed it under road rumors, which were frequently more dramatic than accurate. Looking at the particular quality of Urzoth's attention now, he filed it somewhere else. "Do you know what is doing it?" "No, but I have a theory." She ate the flatbread. "Something large enough to take wagons whole, something that does not leave tracks or leaves tracks that fill in fast because it prefers wet ground. Greyfen Marshes are on the eastern border of that road." "That does describe a marshcrawler," he said. He had never seen one, but he had read the accounts. A massive, pale, semi-aquatic ambush predator, something between a crocodile and a nightmare, that hunted at night along water-adjacent terrain. They were rare this far north. They were supposed to be rare. It describes a marshcrawler, Urzoth agreed. And if there is a marshcrawler working the Greyfen Road, then anyone traveling that road in the next week is at serious risk. He looked at her. She looked at him. The cook stall steamed around them in the cold morning. "My contract," he said. "I know. I need the Ashfield contract. They are expecting the medicines. The garrison is short-staffed and 2 soldiers are already sick. I have the only supply of fever tincture between here and the capital." "I know that too," Urzoth said. She had both hands flat on the table and she was studying him with that reading a text she needed to learn look. "My contract collapsed. I am between jobs. The Greyfen Road is 3 days and a possible marshcrawler." She turned her cup slowly on the table. "I will take the road with you. 50 silver when we reach Ashfield Keep, out of whatever the garrison pays you. I am not sure the garrison pays enough for both of us. 40 then. And whatever herbs I might need for injuries along the way at no charge from your stock." He thought about it for approximately 4 seconds. This was not, he understood, strictly a business decision. Or rather, it was a business decision nested inside several other kinds of decisions, some of which he was not yet prepared to examine directly. "Done," he said. "We leave in 2 hours." The road east was quieter than Millhaven's lanes had been, and they moved through the gray morning with the easy rhythm of 2 people who had both spent years learning how to travel. Urzoth rode a dun-colored mare with the attentive carriage of a horse that had been excellently trained, and she sat the saddle the way she had moved in the stable yard, with complete, unhurried competence. Elijah's mule was not glamorous but was steady, and he had long since made peace with the particular dignity of a man who traveled behind a mule named Gerard. He had expected silence. She surprised him. She asked about his work, not the polite social surface of asking but the actual questions, sharp and specific. What he could and could not treat in the field, how he sourced his materials, what the limits of herbal medicine were against the kinds of injuries a garrison soldier was likely to present. He answered with equal directness, and in answering found himself talking about things he rarely talked about: the months he had spent in the South after the border wars ended, working a traveling clinic out of the back of a wagon, and the specific exhausting heartbreak of doing work that felt necessary but never finished. "You could have set up a shop," she said. "Stayed in one place." "I could have." He watched the road ahead. "It never quite fit. Being still, being only in one place," he said. "There is always somewhere the work is needed more." Urzoth was quiet for a moment. "My mother used to say something like that. She said that a warrior who only defends one valley will never know what is threatening the next one. She sounds like she was worth knowing." She was. Urzoth kept her eyes on the road ahead, but her voice stayed level. "She died at Burned River. In the final week before the skirmishes ended, a beat. She did not have a field healer." He sat with that. He did not try to fix it. He did not say anything useful or soothing. He let it sit between them in the gray morning air and be what it was. After a while, Urzoth said, "She would have found you irritating. Most people do. She would also have liked you, for the same reasons." He glanced over. She was not looking at him, but the corner of her mouth was doing that thing again, the barely there movement that was not quite a smile but was in the same family of feelings. By afternoon, the road had narrowed, and the ground on either side had gone soft and dark with marsh water seeping through the reeds. The sky was low, and the light had turned that flat, directionless gray that makes distances impossible to judge. Elijah kept Gerard close to Urzoth's mare, and Urzoth kept one hand near the short sword on her left hip, not tense, just ready. They stopped to water the animals at a stone trough where the road bent around a stand of black alders, and that was where they found the first sign of it. The trough's near edge was gouged. Not hacked, gouged, as though something had gripped the stone lip hard enough to crack it. The cracks were fresh. In the mud around the trough's base there were marks that might have been tracks and might have been where the mud had simply churned and resettled, except that the pattern of them was deliberate, a wide, pressing drag, moving from the marsh edge and back again. Urzoth crouched and looked at the marks without touching them. She was very still in the crouch, weight on her heels, and she stayed that way for long enough that Elijah stopped watching the marks and watched her instead. "Recently," she said. "How recently?" "Last night, probably. Maybe this morning," she straightened. "It has been here before. The alders on the marsh edge are broken, see? 3 of them. Something large came through more than once." She looked east, where the road curved into a cut between 2 ridge lines before descending again toward flatter ground. "The Garrison Road dips down into the low basin before Ashfield, yes. Yes, about a day's ride. That is where it will be hunting." She looked at him. "We cannot make it to Ashfield before dark if we keep the pace we have been keeping. I know, camping on this road after dark would be unwise. I know that too." She looked at him steadily. He looked back. The cold air smelled of marsh and wet alder bark and the particular muddy richness of low, wet earth. In that light, with that smell, and with the specific weight of what they both understood to be true about the night ahead, something passed between them, not spoken, not quite acknowledged, just a mutual recognition that they were standing in the same place, facing the same thing, and that this was the shape of what they were doing now. "There is a ruin," she said, "about 3 miles east. A watchtower from before the last war. I came this road 2 seasons ago and saw it." She glanced at the sky. "We can reach it before the light goes. Stone walls, defensible. Lead," he said. The ruined watchtower was exactly as she had described it, 4 stone walls, 2 still standing full height, a partial roof over the east corner, and a doorway that could be blocked with the wooden shutters that were inexplicably still hinged to both sides of it. Someone had used it as a shelter before them. There was a ring of fire stones in the middle of the floor and a cache of dry firewood in the least drafty corner, wrapped in oilcloth against moisture, which Elijah chose to read as a very good sign about the general character of the previous occupants. He got a fire going while Urzoth checked the perimeter, moving around the outside of the tower with the same unhurried, attentive thoroughness she brought to everything. When she came back inside, she pulled the shutters to and wedged them with a length of fallen timber, and then she sat down across the fire from him and looked at him with the amber eyes. "If it comes tonight," she said, "do not run for the horses. They will be its first target. If we are in the tower and it cannot get through the walls, we are alive until morning." She was direct, as she always was, but there was something careful in how she said it, the way people are careful with information they think the listener might need time to absorb. "Can you fight?" "I have a belt knife," he said. "I know how to use it. I would not describe what I do as fighting." "Stay behind me then if it comes through the door." "Urzoth." "Yes. Have you ever fought a marshcrawler?" A pause. "No," she said, "but I have read the accounts." "So have I," he said. "That is not particularly reassuring." "No," she agreed. "It is not." And then, after a beat, she said, "I am, however, very good at fighting things I have never fought before. It is something of a specialty." "Because you train with your eyes closed." She looked at him across the fire. There were shadows moving in her amber eyes from the flames, and she tilted her head with the particular quality of someone who has just been asked a question they have been thinking about asking themselves. "Come here," she said. "I beg your pardon." She was already standing. She unhooked the short wooden practice sword from her belt. She carried it separately from her real blade, strapped alongside, and held it out handle first. "Stand up, take it." He stood, he took it. It was heavier than he expected. "Hold it the way you would hold the knife," she said. He shifted his grip. She walked around him slowly, not touching, just looking, the same way she had looked at the tracks in the mud. "Your elbow," she said. "Drop it." He dropped it. "Now close your eyes." He looked at her. "Close your eyes, Elijah." He closed them. The firelight went from orange to red dark against his lids, and the sounds of the tower sharpened, the fire, the wind through the gaps in the partial roof, the horses stamping outside, and Urzoth moving very quietly around him. "What do you notice?" she said. Her voice came from his right. "Where you are," he said. "Good, what else?" He thought about it. "The fire is warmer on my left. The gap in the roof is above and forward." The draft from under the door is at my feet. Good, she said again. And then from a different angle. When I come at you, you will feel me before you can see me. Not much, but enough the movement of air, the sound of my boot on stone. If you are waiting on a visual, you will always be behind. If you are waiting on every sense at once, you will not be. He felt her step toward him fast, and something in the air changed, and he turned without thinking, and her hand closed on the wrist of his sword hand, not hard, gentle, almost, and she said quietly close to his ear, "There." He opened his eyes. She was very close. Closer than the lesson strictly required, close enough that he could see the individual beads of moisture still in her hair from the morning's rain, close enough to see the small scar at the corner of her jaw, close enough that when she exhaled, he felt it. She was not moving back. He said, "Is that what you are training for, when you close your eyes in the yard?" Her grip on his wrist loosened, but her fingers stayed, resting there like something that had not yet decided whether to stay or go. "Yes," she said. "I close them so I have to feel the form instead of watching it. So the correction happens in my body instead of my eyes." She looked up at him. She was nearly his height but not quite, and the slight difference made her look up by that small amount, which changed the angle of her gaze in a way he found he needed to look at. "But you were right this morning. I have been reinforcing the error. I could feel it when you said it. I have been too committed to the right side before the swing." "You do not usually accept correction," he said. He said it without judgment. He simply had the strong impression that it was true. "No," she said. "Usually I do not." The fire crackled. The wind moved overhead. Her fingers were still on his wrist, resting there, and the warmth of them was specific and present in a way that he was very aware of and doing his very best to behave sensibly about. "You are remarkably calm," she said, "for a man sleeping in a ruin with a potentially large predator outside." "I find," he said carefully, "that there are things in this room that are more immediate to my attention." She looked at him. And for the first time since he had met her, the careful, measuring calm of her face broke open just slightly. Not entirely, not dramatically, but enough. Something real and warm and a little surprised showed through, and she looked for that moment exactly like what she was. A woman of 26 who had spent most of her life being entirely self-sufficient and was finding, with some mix of confusion and interest, that this was perhaps not what she had always assumed. She stepped back. She did it without urgency, without discomfort, the way you step back from a fire that is warm rather than hot. She sat down by the fire and picked up the cup of traveling tea he had brewed earlier, which was now cool. "Tell me about the marshcrawler accounts," she said. "Everything you remember." He sat down across from her. He told her. And they talked through the night in shifts, taking turns watching at the door gap with the shutters wedged, keeping the fire low, going through everything both of them knew or had read or had heard about marshcrawlers from people who had come close to them and kept their lives. The talking was partly strategy, and partly the thing that talking in the dark always was, a way of being less alone with the weight of the night. Nothing came. In the first gray of morning, with the birds starting up in the marsh reeds and the horses stamping with relief at the returning light, Urzoth stood at the doorway of the tower and looked east. She had her real sword on her hip now instead of the practice blade. She had slept maybe 2 hours sitting up, and she looked entirely ready to face the day, which Elijah found both impressive and faintly unreasonable. "We move fast today," she said. "Get to the basin before midday, cross it, make Ashfield by late afternoon." "The basin," he said, "that is where you think it is. That is where the terrain fits. Low ground, wet, enclosed by the ridges, plenty of cover, plenty of approaches." She looked at him over her shoulder. "Stay close and keep Gerard quiet. He is a good mule, but he is going to smell it before we do, and I need him not to bolt. He has never bolted in 6 years. He has also never smelled a marshcrawler." "Fair," Elijah conceded. He packed the fire ring with care, made sure no coals were left, and went to get the animals. The basin road was exactly as bad as Urzoth had predicted. The ground softened from firm, packed earth to something that sucked at the horses' hooves, and the ridge on either side closed in like walls, and the light went flat and strange the way it does in enclosed low ground where the sky is a narrow strip above you and the world around you is wet and dense. Reeds thick as a man's arm grew along the left edge of the road. The right side was hard clay bank, 4 feet high, cut back by old roadworks. They were halfway through the basin when Gerard stopped. He did not sidestep or pull. He simply stopped, feet planted, and his ears went forward and sideways at the same time in the way that horses and mules have when they are receiving information from several directions at once and none of it is good. Urzoth was off her mare in one motion, hand on her sword. She did not draw it. She stood beside her horse and her head came up and she went through the same thing Gerard was doing, that multi-directional attention, ears effectively wide open, reading the air. Elijah held still on Gerard's back. He was running through everything he had read about marshcrawlers, which was useful in the way that reading about lightning is useful, good for understanding the general nature of it, less good for the specific experience of being struck. Left, Urzoth said very quietly. She said it without moving her head. He looked left. The reeds were still, but the stillness was wrong, too still, the kind of not moving that is something actively not moving rather than simple absence. It came out of the reeds with a sound that Elijah's brain struggled to categorize, somewhere between a wave and a landslide. He had a fragmented impression of gray-white bulk, of a flat, broad head lower to the ground than he expected, of a neck that was tremendously long and tremendously fast, and then Urzoth moved. She moved left and forward toward it, not away, and her sword came out in the same motion, and she struck for the soft tissue at the hinge of the jaw, which was what every account Elijah had ever read said was the only reliable strike point. She hit it. Not solidly. The thing was already twisting, lunging sideways, but she scored it, and the sound it made was very loud and very wrong, and it went back into the reeds. Elijah had Gerard moving, pulling the lead of Urzoth's mare, heading east fast. Urzoth ran alongside. She did not look back until they were 100 yards down the road and the sound of the thing in the reeds had gone from crashing to that terrible stillness again, and then she looked back and said, "It is not following." Why not? Because it is hurt, and because it is not confident in the open road. It hunts from cover. She was breathing hard for the first time he had seen her breathing hard. Her sword hand had a small cut on it. She must have caught the blade edge in the movement, and blood was running freely down her wrist. She looked at it as though it were mildly surprising. "It will try again tonight if we camp in the basin." "We will not camp in the basin," he said. "Get on your horse, I will bind that hand while we ride. It is fine. It is a sword cut and it is deep and it is fine right up until it is infected." He was already pulling gauze from his saddlebag, riding one-handed with Gerard beautifully steady beneath him, earning his trust in the same way he always did, by being exactly what he was without drama. "Give me your hand." Urzoth looked at him for one beat, then gave him her hand across the gap between the horses. He bound it while they rode, not looking at her, focused on the dressing. Her hand was large and warm and strong, and she held it absolutely steady the entire time, which made the work easier and also made him aware of her hand in a way that was somewhat outside the scope of clinical focus. "You are good at that," she said. "Years of practice." He tied off the bandage with a small, neat knot. "You are good at moving toward things instead of away from them." "Years of practice," she said. She did not take her hand back immediately. He noticed that he did not release it immediately. After a moment she said, "We should keep moving." "Yes," he said. They kept moving. Ashfield Keep rose out of the late afternoon light like something that had been planted there by someone who believed in permanence. Stone walls, a heavy gate, a garrison flag that snapped stiff in the easterly wind coming off the marshes. The gate guards saw them coming from 100 yards and opened the outer gate without challenge. Word traveled, apparently, even to remote garrisons, because the garrison commander was at the inner gate to meet them himself. Commander Petra House was a compact woman of 40 with a soldier's posture and a physician's quick, assessing eyes. She looked at Urzoth without the particular social performance that most people went through upon seeing an orc warrior for the first time. Just looked, noted, filed it. "You brought a contractor," she said to Elijah. "She came with me. Without her the supplies do not arrive." He handed over the first saddlebag. "The fever tincture is in the blue stoppered bottles. I would start the 2 sick soldiers tonight." House took the bag. She looked at Urzoth's bound hand. "You came through the Greyfen Basin." "There is a marshcrawler," Urzoth said, "working the basin road, hunting at night from the reed bed on the west side of the low section. It took the wagons." House's expression went through several things quickly. "Can it be killed?" "Yes," Urzoth said, "but not by one person with a sword. You need 4 or 5 closing from multiple angles to prevent it retreating to the reeds, crossbows for the flanks, someone with a weapon heavy enough to do real damage up the center when it commits to a strike." She looked at House. "I would suggest not waiting. It will get bolder." House looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at Elijah. "She's good." "She is," Elijah said, "better at this than anyone I have met." That evening, Elijah was settled in the garrison's small infirmary, seeing to the 2 sick soldiers, a fever that had been allowed to run too long, which he could manage now that he had his supplies, when Urzoth appeared in the doorway. She had cleaned up since arriving, her hair down from the bone-beaded knot and hanging loose to her shoulders, and she was carrying 2 cups of the garrison's evening stew and a heel of bread. She held 1 cup out toward him across the infirmary without speaking. He looked at the patient on the nearest cot, looked back at her. "10 minutes," he said. "Let me finish here." "I will wait," she said, and sat in the chair by the door. She waited the full 10 minutes and 12 more while he finished his notes and cleaned his tools and checked the second soldier's temperature a second time, because he was that kind of person and could not help it. When he finally sat down beside her on the bench near the infirmary door and took the stew, she said nothing about the wait. They ate in easy silence, and it was, in a way that Elijah had stopped being entirely able to pretend, was merely collegial, the most comfortable he had felt in months. Possibly longer. "Commander House wants me to lead the hunt," Urzoth said when the stew was mostly gone. "When?" 3 days, when she has had time to organize the party properly. "She wants 6 garrison soldiers and me." She turned the cup slowly. "She is going to offer me a contract for it." "That is good." "I told her I would think about it." She looked at him sideways. "You will be at Ashfield for how long?" 2-3 days. "I need to document the delivery and do a thorough assessment of the 6 soldiers before I leave. And there are 2 others with joint swelling from the damp that House mentioned in her letter. I want to see them while I am here." "Then you will still be here when the hunt goes out." "I will." She looked at the cup. "You should come. I am a field healer, not a. I know what you are. I want you there." She said it the way she said most things, directly, without the softening cushion of plausible deniability. She had not learned the habit of leaving herself retreat routes in conversation, which he found, if he was honest with himself, extremely attractive. "If someone gets hurt, I want someone there who knows what to do about it. Besides which—" She stopped. "Besides which," she glanced over. In the weak light of the infirmary doorway, her amber eyes were very warm, and the expression in them was the real one, not the measuring and filing version. "I do not particularly want you to leave before that," she said. Elijah looked at her. The stew cup in his hand was cooling. The garrison outside was settling into its evening sounds, the changing of the watch, the horses in the stable, the low conversation of soldiers around a fire somewhere across the yard. All of it was very far away. "Then I will come on the hunt," he said. Urzoth looked back at the infirmary doorway. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You noticed this morning that I did not take my hand back right away." He said nothing. "I noticed it too," she said. I am not always certain what to do with things I notice." She said this with the care of someone who was being more honest than usual and knew it. "It is not a skill I have spent much time developing." "That makes 2 of us," he said. She looked at him again. And then, with the same unhesitating directness she brought to sword strikes and honest statements, she leaned across the narrow distance between them on the bench and kissed him. Not tentatively, not as a question, as a thing she had decided to do. It was brief, but it was warm and it was real, and when she pulled back she looked at him with those amber eyes at very close range, and her expression was its own language. He said, "You are not usually uncertain about things." "No," she said, "I am not." "Then why tell me you were uncertain about this?" She considered it. "Because I thought you might need to hear that I was something other than just sure of myself, with this, a beat. And because it was true." He looked at her. He reached up without overthinking it and pushed a strand of her loose hair back from her face, and his hand came to rest at the side of her jaw, and she turned her face slightly toward it the way that something warm turns toward heat. "I have been largely alone for a long time," he said. "Not unhappily, but thoroughly. And I am finding these past 2 days that thorough aloneness is not the same as chosen." Urzoth looked at him. Her jaw was warm under his hand. "No," she said quietly, "it is not." He kissed her back. This time neither of them pulled back quickly. The next 3 days had a different quality than the road had. Something had shifted, not dramatically, not with any great declaration, but in the way that light shifts in a room when you move a candle from the table to the windowsill. The room is the same room, and the light is the same light, but the shadows go different places. Urzoth trained in the garrison yard each morning, and Elijah watched from the window of the infirmary, and on the second morning she called across the yard, without looking, "Stop watching and come out here." And he went. And she spent an hour working with him on what she had begun in the watchtower, the close-eyed training, the multi-sense attention, the feel of a form in the body before it becomes a thought in the head. He was, she told him calmly, surprisingly good for a herbalist. "What does that mean, for a herbalist?" "It means that you move more carefully than most people," she said. "You are used to doing precise things with your hands while paying attention to something else. It is most of what this is." She adjusted his elbow, her hand on his arm, firm and sure. "Drop this. Yes, now go." He went through the form. He felt the shift of his own weight, the slight lean right that had been invisible to him a moment ago and was now obvious as a name called in a quiet room. "There," she said. He opened his eyes. She was watching him with the look that was not quite a smile, but was, he had learned, the expression she wore when she was pleased and not bothering to perform indifference about it. "If you end up needing to defend yourself," she said, "you will not be entirely useless." A ringing endorsement. "It is the most honest one I know how to give." She picked up the practice sword from where she had set it against the fence. Again. On the third afternoon, House brought the hunt party together in the garrison yard for the briefing. 6 soldiers, Urzoth at the front with her sword, Elijah to one side with his healer's bag, and the short crossbow he had borrowed from the armory, because Urzoth had looked at the knife on his belt and said, with the air of someone making a reasonable suggestion, "You need something with more range." House herself was coming, which was either very good leadership or very good stubbornness, probably both. The plan was Urzoth's. She had drawn it in the mud of the courtyard with a stick the day before, walking the others through it while Elijah watched from the side and thought, not for the first time, that watching her work was one of the more striking things he had experienced in recent years. She thought in systems. She mapped terrain as a series of angles and decision points. She explained the plan to the soldiers without condescension and without softening, in the direct, clear language of someone who expects to be understood and will give you the tools to understand. The soldiers listened. They asked questions. She answered them. At the end of the briefing, 2 of the soldiers who had come in looking the way that humans sometimes look in an orc's presence, that careful, slightly elevated blankness that covers discomfort, were listening to her the way you listen to someone you trust. She noticed. She did not say anything about it. She simply moved on with the briefing. They went out in the early morning before full light. The basin road was quiet in the cold. The reeds on the west side stood perfectly still. They did not have to wait long. Urzoth had posted the crossbow soldiers on the high clay bank of the right side, elevated, clear sightlines into the reed bed. She had told Elijah to stay on the road behind the line, and keep his crossbow on the gap in the reeds where the thing had emerged before. She had the two heaviest garrison soldiers flanking center, herself at point. She closed her eyes. Elijah saw it from his position behind the line, saw her standing at the edge of the basin road, sword out, eyes fully closed, head lifted slightly, and she was doing what she had shown him in the tower, attending with every sense, waiting for the thing that would happen a half-second before it happened. She said quietly, coming from the left again, same approach, 20 feet. Nobody spoke. The reeds erupted. The crossbow soldiers fired from the bank. 2 bolts struck the thing's flank and it screamed and veered right, which was exactly what Urzoth had predicted it would do when hurt on the left, and she was already in motion, moving to intercept. The 2 heavy soldiers closed in from either side. The marshcrawler's head swung toward the nearest threat and it struck, fast and low, and the nearest soldier went down, not dead, Elijah saw, knocked sideways rather than taken, and then Urzoth hit it. She hit it the way she moved through her forms, fully committed, no hesitation, every ounce of weight behind the blade, going for the soft hinge under the jaw. This time she hit it clean. The thing dropped. It was not immediate. Things that large do not drop immediately. It took another 30 seconds of chaos during which several people moved very fast in several directions, and Urzoth stayed in the center with her sword up, watching until the last involuntary shudder went out of the great pale body. Then she lowered her sword and said to the nearest soldier, "Where is Taryn?" The soldier who had gone down. Here. Elijah was already there. He was kneeling beside the soldier, Taryn, who had a broken wrist from the impact and a gash along his ribs from the edge of the thing's hide, not deep but ragged. "Stay still. I have you." Urzoth came and stood over him while he worked. Not anxiously, she was not that kind of person, but with the specific presence of someone who is making sure things are all right and will do something about it if they are not. When Elijah looked up, she was looking at Taryn with the steady regard of a warrior taking stock of her people. "He will be fine," Elijah said. "Wrist needs splinting and the cut needs a full clean and closure, but none of it is serious." "Good," she said. And then she looked at Elijah, not at Taryn, and said, "And you, I am fine. You fired the crossbow, 3 times, hit it once, not nothing." She looked at him with the warm amber eyes and said, quietly, so only he could hear it, "No, not nothing." And she put her hand briefly on his shoulder, brief and sure, the way she touched things, and went to help the other soldiers secure the carcass. Commander House was not a demonstrative person, but she walked the edge of the dead marshcrawler with the expression of someone who has had a problem for a month, and now the problem was solved, and said to Urzoth, "Name your price for a season's contract." Urzoth named a price that made 2 soldiers nearby exchange a glance, and House said, "Done," without hesitation. They walked back to the garrison in the early morning light with the kill confirmed and Taryn on an improvised stretcher between 2 soldiers and everyone alive, and the sky overhead had gone from gray to a pale, washed gold that made the frost on the road glitter. Urzoth walked beside Elijah. Their arms were close enough that he could feel the warmth of her through his coat. "You said you would think about House's contract," he said. "I thought about it. And now you have taken a season's contract." "Yes." A beat. The frost crackled underfoot. That is, he considered the right word. That is good news for the garrison and for the road. He kept his voice even. "The road will be safer for travelers." She glanced at him. "Yes, including herbalists with supply contracts who use the Greyfen Road on a regular basis. Who might, for instance, have good reasons to pass through Ashfield keep frequently over the course of a season." Urzoth kept walking for another 3 paces. Then she said without looking at him, "Is this you being very subtle?" "I am trying to be. You are not good at it." "I know." She stopped walking. He stopped. They were in the middle of the frost-glittering road with the garrison a 1/4 mile ahead, and the other soldiers already moving ahead, and the pale gold morning around them. She turned to face him. She looked at him the way she had looked at the dead marshcrawler, thorough, honest, without flinching from what was true. "I want you to come back," she said. "When your delivery is done and you are on the road again, I want you to come back to Ashfield." She said it plainly, the way she said everything plainly, and in the plainness of it there was something large and real. I am not good at wanting things gently. I either want them or I do not. He looked at her. The morning light was full on her face, and she was extraordinary in it, the green of her skin lit gold, those amber eyes completely steady, the bone bead at her collar catching light. "I will come back," he said. "On your next run." "On my next run." He held her gaze. "I am not good at gentle either. I find I have been thinking about this quite a lot since the watchtower, and I would rather be direct about it." "Yes," she said, "that is the correct approach." And because they were standing in the middle of the road in broad morning light with the garrison visible ahead and 3 soldiers who were definitely looking back, he kissed her anyway, straightforwardly, with intention, his hands on her face. And she kissed him back with that same quality she brought to everything: full commitment, no hesitation, no pretending it was less than it was. When they broke apart, she said, without particular embarrassment, "The soldiers are staring." "Let them," he said. The corner of her mouth moved all the way this time. A real smile, specific and warm and slightly dangerous, and directed entirely at him. "Let them," she agreed. The next morning, Elijah loaded his saddlebags with the documentation of the delivery and the garrison commander's signed receipt, and he was tightening Gerard's girth in the stable when Urzoth appeared. She leaned against the stable doorframe and watched him with both arms crossed and an expression of such unself-conscious directness that he almost fumbled the buckle. 3 weeks, she said. "To do your circuit and come back. Probably 3 weeks, maybe 4. If it is 4, I will come and find you on the road." He looked over his shoulder at her. "Is that a threat?" "It is a statement of intention." She pushed off the doorframe. She walked to where he was standing with the mule, and she put her hands on either side of his face and kissed him in a way that said, with considerable clarity, a number of things that she might not yet have found words for. When she was done, she stepped back and looked at him with calm amber eyes. "Come back," she said. "I will come back," he said. "Urzoth." "Yes. I am extremely—" He stopped. He tried again. "I do not say this kind of thing often, or at all, really. But I am extremely glad I said something stupid about your weight distribution in the rain." She looked at him for a moment. Then she laughed, a real laugh, sudden and warm and unself-conscious, lower-pitched than her speaking voice, and it transformed her face entirely, opened it up, and he thought that he could spend a considerable amount of time working to be the reason for that sound. "Get on the road," she said, still smiling. "Before I decide to come with you. You could. I have a contract." "I know." He swung up onto Gerard. He looked down at her from the saddle. 4 weeks at most." She nodded. She watched him ride out. When he looked back from the gate, she was still standing in the stable doorway with the morning light across her face, and she raised one hand in a send-off that was neither a wave nor a salute but something of both, particular to her, and he carried it with him down the road. The 3 weeks were in fact 3.5. His circuit took him through 2 villages that had not been scheduled, because there were 2 situations in those villages that required immediate attention. A badly managed fever outbreak in the first, a birthing complication in the second, and Elijah was constitutionally incapable of moving past things that required him. He sent a courier ahead to Ashfield with a note that said, essentially, "Delayed but coming," and pushed Gerard as hard as he could justify on the last day of the road. He arrived at Ashfield Keep in the late afternoon to find the garrison significantly more alive than he had left it. 4 additional soldiers had come in from an outpost to the south, and there was the particular organized energy of a garrison that has been recently productive and knows it. When he rode through the gate, the guard on duty said, without preamble, "She is in the yard." He left Gerard with the stable boy and went to the yard. Urzoth was in the yard, and she was not alone in it. She had 3 garrison soldiers arranged in a loose ring around her, and she was putting them through a training form, eyes open, this time, calling corrections to each of them in turn with the calm, sharp attention she brought to everything. She had clearly been doing this for some time. All 3 soldiers had the slightly damp, focused look of people who have been working hard. She saw Elijah over the nearest soldier's shoulder. For a moment, nothing changed in her face or her instruction. She finished the correction she was in the middle of giving. She told the 3 soldiers to take a break. And then she walked toward him with that long, ground-covering stride of hers, and when she got to him she looked him over the way she looked at things she was taking stock of and said, 3.5 weeks. I sent a note. I got the note. There were 2 situations on the circuit that I know, she said. That is who you are. She reached up and took a brief, firm hold of the front of his coat. I did not say I was angry. You have the tone of someone who is at least mildly. I am not angry, she said. I missed you. Those are different things. She pulled on the coat front very slightly. I missed you and now you are here. Yes. Yes, he said. I am here. She kissed him, right there in the yard, with 3 garrison soldiers on a water break approximately 30 feet away, and the gate guard watching from his post. And she did it the way she did everything, without apology, without performance, because it was the true thing and she did not see any particular reason to pretend otherwise. One of the 3 soldiers on the break said to the other 2 something that made all of them laugh. It was not, from the sound of it, unkind laughter. Urzoth broke the kiss and looked at him with warm amber eyes. Come inside, she said. You look like you have not slept properly in a week. I have not slept properly in a week. I have a room in the East Tower, she said. It is warm and the cot is large enough. She was already walking toward the garrison's interior. She glanced back. Are you coming? He went. The East Tower room was warm, as she had said, a small square space with a cot that was indeed large enough, a low table with a candle, a peg on the wall where her sword belt hung with habitual precision, and 2 books stacked under the table that were, on closer inspection, field accounts of various campaigns in the southern marshes. He looked at the books and looked at her. Research, she said unapologetically. For the next hunt, and the one after. She had her arms crossed and was watching him look around the room with the expression he had come to understand as her version of warmth, a specific attentiveness, directed at him that was not cool assessment but something that cared about what it saw. There is a chair. You do not have to stand there as though you are cataloging the space. I am, he said, a little bit cataloging the space. Because I have been thinking about it. He sat in the chair. He leaned back and looked at the ceiling. On the road, I have been thinking about this room, this specific place, which is strange because I had not seen it. What did you imagine it was like? He thought about it. Exactly this, he said. Organized, practical, a little sparse but not uncomfortable, with books about marshes under the table. Urzoth looked at him. She sat down on the edge of the cot. The courier brought your note, she said. The one about the delay. I read it probably 3 times. It was not a long note. No, she turned the cot's edge of the blanket in her fingers without looking at it. But it was written the way you talk, which she stopped, tried again. I have found that when someone has been absent, things that carry their way of speaking are disproportionately important. He looked at her. She was looking at the blanket edge, not at him, and there was something in her face that was very honest and a little uncomfortable with itself. The way people look when they have admitted something that they cannot now take back and are deciding whether or not they wanted to take it back. Urzoth, he said. She looked up. I thought about you every day, he said. Every day on the circuit, not as a distraction, but as he found the right word. Accompaniment. The way you think about something that has become part of the shape of your days. She held his gaze. The candlelight was warm and the room was quiet. That is a good way to put it, she said. He got up from the chair and crossed the small room and sat beside her on the cot, and she turned to face him, and they were very close and neither of them moved for a moment that had its own particular quality, not tension, not waiting, but the recognition of something that was exactly as real as they had both, separately on long miles of road, understood it to be. She put her hand on the side of his face. Her thumb traced his jaw with a gentleness that was different from her usual efficient precision, gentler than her training or her sword strikes or her direct, unpadded statements, a tenderness that was specifically for him, given freely, and he understood that it was not something she gave freely to many things. "I am not practiced at this," she said quietly. She glanced away briefly, then back. "At letting someone matter this much. I have not done this before. Not really." "You are doing it exactly right," he said. "As far as I can tell, you are not a reliable judge of that." "I am extremely biased," he agreed, "for obvious reasons." She looked at him with those amber eyes, and then she smiled again, that real, sudden smile that changed her face, that he had been thinking about for 3.5 weeks. And then she leaned forward and kissed him softly and deliberately. And then not softly. And the candle on the table burned down slowly in the warm room, and the garrison outside went to its evening watch, and the world continued doing whatever it was doing. And none of it was particularly important. There is a thing that happens between two people who have both been alone for a long time and have found, to their mutual surprise, something that fits. It is not a dramatic thing. It is quiet in the way that deeply real things sometimes are. It is the particular ease of being with someone who sees you as you are, not the version you perform for strangers, not the story you tell people to explain yourself, but the actual, specific, sometimes awkward person, and finds that person not only acceptable but worth staying for. Elijah had known this ease in his work, in the specific engagement of a patient's trust, in the moment when someone in pain lets you help them. He had not known it like this, in the warm quiet of a stone room with a woman who had trained with her eyes closed for 2 hours in the rain, and then, over flatbread and eggs, had asked him questions that required him to think. Urzoth had known something similar in her work, in the clear, unambiguous trust of people she had protected, in the completeness of a plan perfectly executed. She had not known it like this. She had, in fact, worked quite hard, for quite a long time, to make sure she did not need to know anything like this. It was simpler to be competent and alone and certain of the boundaries of her own life. She was finding that what she had thought was simplicity was a different thing. The week since Elijah had left on his circuit had clarified this considerably. The second big hunt of the season happened 5 weeks later. There had been smaller work in between, a protection contract for a merchant caravan on the southern fork of the Greyfen Road, which Urzoth completed efficiently and without incident, and during which Elijah made his second circuit and came back as he had promised. He spent 3 days at Ashfield between circuits, and in those 3 days something settled that had been in the process of settling since the first night in the watchtower, settled properly, without drama, the way foundations settle when the weight above them is right. He made a standing arrangement with House to service the garrison's medical supplies on a monthly circuit. The garrison paid better than his previous contracts, partly because House was not a person who believed in underpaying for necessary things, and partly because having a field healer on regular contract was an actual strategic advantage for a garrison that dealt with marshland hazards. It made geographical sense for him to keep Ashfield as his base. He and Urzoth did not make a great announcement of this. They simply arranged for his equipment to occupy a corner of the East Tower room, and the matter was settled. The second big hunt was for a different problem. A massive boar that had been destroying the farmsteads in the valley east of the keep. Not a magical creature, not a marshcrawler, just an enormous, old, battle-scarred boar that had apparently decided it was in charge of the valley and was making a compelling case through property damage and 2 non-fatal but serious gorings. House had 3 complaints from farmers in a week and authorized the hunt on the 4th day. This time Urzoth did not close her eyes during the planning. She walked the affected farmsteads with Elijah because she wanted his observation, which was good and careful, and often caught things she had not noticed from a pure tactical standpoint. The angle of a broken fence post that told you which direction the boar had come from, the location of a grain store that was drawing it to the same farmstead repeatedly. He walked the farms and she walked beside him, and they worked out the plan together, which was different from her doing it alone and him watching, and both of them noticed that it was different and did not say anything about it. The hunt itself went smoothly for the first 20 minutes, and then went wrong in the specific way that hunting large, intelligent animals often goes wrong, which is that the animal has its own opinion about the plan. The boar went for Urzoth directly. This was because she was at point by choice, and because she had the most deliberate, focused presence of anyone in the hunting party, and large, intelligent animals have opinions about focused presence. It came out of the bracken on her right when she had been expecting it on her left. The first time in Elijah's experience of watching her that her read of an approach had been incorrect, and it hit the shield of the soldier to her right and deflected off, turned, and came for her again. She went left and down, which was fast and right, but she caught the edge of its left tusk on the way down, and it opened a gash along her upper arm deep, ugly, not immediately dangerous but immediately painful, which meant she had one arm that was significantly less than operational and a 200-pound boar regrouping for another charge. Elijah shot it with the crossbow from 30 yards and hit it in the shoulder. It was not a killing shot, but it turned the boar again, and the two flanking hunters came in from the left and finished the job. He was at Urzoth's side before the boar had fully dropped. "I see it," she said. She was looking at the arm with the appraising expression of someone who has been hurt before and is cataloging the current hurt against a known scale. "Sit down." "I do not need to sit down." "Urzoth, sit down." She looked at him. He was already opening his field kit, hands steady, face focused. She sat down on the nearest fallen log. He worked quickly cleaning the gash, which was deep enough to require closure, using the curved needle and gut thread that he kept in a sealed oilcloth case for exactly this kind of field work. She held her arm steady and looked at the middle distance and said nothing, which was very Urzoth, and he worked without speaking, which was very Elijah. When he was almost done, she said, "I was wrong about the approach direction." "Yes," he said. "I was certain it was coming left." It doubled back. "You could not have known." He tied off the last closure. "Hold still. I should have anticipated the double back." "You are not actually infallible," he said, not unkindly. He was applying the wound salve now, the green-smelling jar that was his own formulation and that he had used on every serious wound he had treated in the last decade. "You are very good. That is not the same thing." She looked at him. "I know," she said after a moment. "I know it is not the same thing." She glanced at the arm, at his hands on it, at the careful way he was working. "I do not like being wrong. Nobody does. But you are treating it as a failure rather than a correction, and those are different things too." He wrapped the dressing and tied it with the small, neat knot she had come to recognize. "You told me that, in the garrison yard, when I was reinforcing an error with my eyes closed." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said in a different tone, quieter, more private, "You listen to everything I say." "Yes," he said. "It is." She looked at the wrapped arm. "It is unusual for someone to listen and then use it back to me months later with perfect accuracy." She raised her eyes to his face. "It is unusual. I mean, it matters to me that you do that." He looked at her. He had the kit half-packed and her wounded arm between his hands and 3 garrison soldiers approximately 40 feet away, trying very politely to give them privacy by examining the boar with intense interest. And there was something in her face that was so unguarded and specific that he felt it like a hand on his chest. "You matter to me," he said, simply, directly, because she always responded to direct. "All of you. The training forms and the research books and the way you drink ale and the way you look at problems that need solving and this." He touched the edge of the wrapped dressing very gently. "All of it. You matter to me entirely." Urzoth looked at him for a long, quiet moment. The bracken around them smelled of cold earth and the faint copper of the hunt, and overhead the sky had gone to that deep, late-afternoon blue that comes just before the light gives out. "Elijah," she said. "Yes. I love you." She said it the way she said everything, plainly, without the softening of ambiguity, because she did not leave herself retreat routes in conversation, and she had decided this was the true thing. I have not said that before, to anyone. But I am telling you because it is true, and I do not see any good reason to not say true things." He looked at her. Something happened in the area of his chest that was not precisely medical in nature. "I love you," he said. "I have been working up to saying it for approximately 2 months, and you have beaten me to it, which is extremely on character." Her mouth moved. The smile came, sudden and warm and real. "You could have said it first." "I know, I was trying to find the right moment." "There is no right moment," she said. "There is just the moment when it is true." She reached up with her good arm and took the front of his coat. "This is that moment." He leaned in and kissed her, and she kissed him back. And one of the soldiers across the bracken field almost certainly saw, but had the considerable social grace to say absolutely nothing about it. The moment that came to be known in the garrison, with the gentle teasing that develops between people who work and live closely together, as the moment they were dramatically discovered, happened on a Thursday afternoon in the East Tower. It happened because House needed to discuss the supply contract renewal urgently, and the garrison's young aide Wren, 17 and earnest and deeply apologetic after the fact, had knocked twice on the East Tower door and genuinely believed there had been no response, and had opened the door because she had a letter in her hand that was time-sensitive from the supply merchant in Millhaven. What she found was Urzoth sitting cross-legged on the cot with a half-repaired sword belt in her lap and a bone needle in her hand and her hair entirely down, and Elijah sitting behind her on the same cot, doing exactly what he had been doing for the past half hour, which was very carefully rebraiding the back section of her hair at her specific request, because the braid had come loose during training, and she could not reach it cleanly with her wrist wrapped. And she had asked him with the same direct pragmatism she brought to everything, "Can you braid?" And he had said, "I can try," and she had said, "Then try," and there they were. It was, taken at face value, an entirely innocent scene. It was also the most domestic thing Elijah had ever been involved in, and sitting behind her with his hands careful in her hair while she worked on the sword belt repair with equally careful hands, he had been aware of a warmth in his chest that had very little to do with the room temperature. Wren stood in the doorway. She looked at them. Elijah looked back at her over the top of Urzoth's head. Urzoth did not even look up. "The letter," Urzoth said. Wren, recovering admirably, held the letter out. "From the supply merchant in Millhaven. Commander House said it was urgent and I knocked. I truly did." "Leave the letter," Urzoth said. She still had not looked up from the belt, and closed the door. Wren left the letter on the small table. She closed the door. Her footsteps retreated down the tower stairs at a pace that suggested she had a great deal to process. Elijah said, "She is going to tell everyone." "Everyone already knows," Urzoth said. She set down the belt and picked up the letter, looked at it, set it down again for later. "Hold the section you have. Do not lose the tension." He held the section he had. He resumed braiding. She picked up the belt repair. He said after a moment, "Everyone already knows." "Soldiers talk," she said. "They have known since the market square in Millhaven." A pause. "Probably since before that, honestly. I am not very subtle when I am paying attention to someone." He thought about the 2 hours in the rain, the stable yard, the way she had said without blinking, "You are not afraid of me." "No," he said, "you are not." "Is that a problem?" "It is the opposite of a problem." He finished the braid and secured it with the bone bead that she had passed him at the beginning of the project. He looked at the back of her head. It was, to his complete surprise, a very clean braid. "There." She put her hand up and touched it, tested the tension, nodded once. "Good," she said. She picked up the letter. "The supply merchant wants to increase prices on treated leather. We will need to renegotiate." She unfolded it. "House will want to hear about this." He looked at the back of her head, at the braid he had made, which she was now entirely focused past because the letter was a problem to solve, and problems to solve had her full attention. He said quietly, "Urzoth, I want you to know that I am extremely happy." She paused. Just for a moment, with the letter half open, she paused. Then she turned to look at him over her shoulder, and her face was unguarded in that way it sometimes was, that real, warm, specific face that was only for him. "Good," she said. Her voice was quiet. "Me too." She turned back to the letter. He leaned forward and put his chin on her shoulder and looked at the letter with her, and she adjusted her angle so he could see it better, and they read it together in the warm, small room. The supply merchant's price increase was, on investigation, driven by a shortage of treated leather from the southern tanneries, which was itself driven by a dispute about river access that had been escalating for months and had recently tipped into something more serious. Hal summarized the situation at the garrison's evening meal. She ran briefings at meals because it was efficient, and she was an efficient woman, and Urzoth listened with the focused attention she brought to any problem that had structural complexity. "The river access dispute," she said, when Hal's finished. "Which families?" "Grenville and Ashton. The Grenville family controls the eastern approach to the main tannery reach, and they have been blocking access intermittently for a year. It has recently gone from intermittent to permanent. A magistrate, the regional magistrate, is 3 days south and has apparently been trying to schedule a hearing for 2 months. The Grenville family keeps finding reasons to delay." Hal set down her cup. "In the meantime, 2 tanneries are not getting river access, and the leather supply for the entire northern region is affected." Urzoth looked at the table. She was doing the thing she did when she was mapping a problem, moving through it in her head the way she moved through a training form. "I will go," she said. House looked at her. "Not as a fighter," Urzoth said, "as a negotiator. Or more precisely, as someone whose presence makes negotiation feel more appealing than the alternative." She glanced at Elijah. "You have any knowledge of tannery river access disputes?" "I have a general knowledge of water rights from moving through river-adjacent territories for years," he said. "Not specific legal knowledge. General is enough." She looked back at Hal's. 2 days south. 1 day at the dispute, 2 days back. I can have the access reopened within the week." Hal studied her. "You are confident of this?" "I am confident that the Grenville family has been having things their way because nobody has shown up in person to suggest that their way is inconvenient for a great many people." Urzoth picked up her cup. "I am very good at showing up in person." Elijah went with her. He went partly because she asked, and partly because he had a delivery in one of the villages on the South Road that he had been deferring, and partly, most honestly, because he had discovered that the weeks she had been away on her protection contract were the ones in which he was least productive and most prone to looking at the East Road. The Grenville dispute was exactly as Urzoth had characterized it. The head of the family was a man of 50, with the specific stubbornness of someone who had been unchallenged for long enough to have confused unchallenged with correct. He met them at the gate of his riverside estate and looked at Urzoth the way people who had not previously met her often looked, with a flat, hostile blankness that was covering a recalibration of whatever he had expected. Urzoth said, in a tone that was perfectly polite and perfectly immovable, "I am here on behalf of Commander House of Ashfield Keep and the regional supply chain. The river access is going to reopen today. The question I am here to discuss with you is only what arrangements you receive in exchange for that." She tilted her head slightly. "I have found it is useful to be direct about the parts that are settled and leave the negotiating energy for the parts that are not. It saves everyone a great deal of time." The man opened his mouth. "The access," she said, "will open today. Would you like to discuss the exchange before or after the midday meal?" They discussed it before. The access reopened by early afternoon. The arrangement involved a reduced crossing fee rather than a blocked road, which House had pre-approved, and the Grenville family found, as Urzoth had predicted, with the slightly weary certainty of someone who has dealt with similar situations before, that a reduced fee was preferable to an escalation that was not going to go their way. On the road back north, Elijah said, "You were extraordinary." "I was reasonable," she said. "Situation required reasonable. Most situations do. You make reasonable look extraordinary." She glanced over. "That is a compliment, intended as one." She rode in silence for a moment. The road was dappled with late-season light coming through the alders, gold and cool, and the horses moved at an easy pace. After a while she said, "Elijah, Yes, I have been thinking. She kept her eyes on the road about the arrangement. What arrangement? The current one. She was still looking at the road. Her posture was its usual straight, easy competence, but there was something careful in the way she was assembling her words. I have a room in the East Tower and your equipment is in the corner and you run your circuits out of Ashfield and come back and she stopped, tried again. I am aware that it is not formally anything, and I am also aware that I have not asked you directly what you Urzoth, he said. I am trying to be direct. You are usually extremely direct. I am, she said, less direct about things that matter more. She finally looked at him. I would like this to be what it is, permanently. Not the specific room arrangement, necessarily, but the us. She said the word as though she had picked it up carefully, as though she was not entirely used to it applying to her. I would like there to be an us. He looked at her, the alders moved overhead, the horses walked. There already is an us, he said, has been for a while. I know, she said, I wanted to say it directly. Then I will say it directly too, he said, there is an us. There will continue to be an us. That is what I want. He held her gaze. Is there an orc custom for this? For he was feeling his way. For making it said formally. She looked at him for a moment. Something moved through her face. There is, she said. There is a claiming word in the old language. It is not performed before people traditionally. It is said privately between the two people. She paused. I was not going to. I did not want to presume that you tell me the word, he said. She looked at him. The amber eyes were very warm and there was something in them that was not measuring or filing or strategizing, just her looking at him. Kethevra, she said. It means she considered. Something like, you are the one I face toward. It is the word that ends ambiguity. She paused. The person who says it first is the one who is declaring the choice. Traditionally, the other person, she stopped. The other person says it back, he said, if they choose to. He looked at her across the small space between their horses, on a road dappled with autumn light, in a world that was going about its business in all directions with magnificent indifference to what was happening on this particular stretch of road at this particular moment. Kethevra, he said. She was very still for a moment. Say it again, she said quietly. Kethevra, he said. I mean it if I am saying it correctly. You are saying it correctly. Her voice was quiet and careful and very real. Kethevra, Elijah, she paused. It means I am done being alone. When I say it to you, that is what it means for me. He reached across the gap between the horses and took her hand. She held it. They rode that way for a long time. The second winter at Ashfield Keep brought snow that came early and heavy off the marshes, turning the garrison yard into a pristine white expanse that Urzoth ran circuits in every morning with an equanimity about cold that Elijah found both impressive and slightly unreasonable. He was a man who appreciated warm rooms and had no philosophical objection to sleeping past dawn on days when his patient load was light. And Urzoth, who was awake at first light in all weather, had long since accepted this about him, with the specific fond tolerance she had developed for all the ways he was entirely himself. They had their disagreements. They were the real kind, between two people who are actually present in each other's lives and not performing compatibility. About resource planning when she took a contract that ran longer than estimated and left him with delayed supply deliveries. About the correct approach to a fever case where he wanted to wait and watch, and she felt the risk required faster action. About whether his tendency to take on additional unscheduled patients while on circuit was a professional asset or a scheduling problem. They argued the way they did most things directly, without much hedging, and with eventual resolution rather than ongoing wound. She was, he thought, the best argument he had ever been in. He was, she thought, not in those words but in the feeling beneath them, the only person she had ever chosen to disagree with and expected to still have afterward. The third hunt was the one that came for them. It was not a marshcrawler this time and not a boar. It was a pack 8 of the gray, oversized wolves that came down from the highland ridges in hard winters, bold from hunger, targeting livestock first and then, when the livestock ran out, whatever else was available. 3 farms in the valley had been hit in a week. One farmhand was dead, taken on the road between barn and house in the early morning dark. House authorized the hunt immediately. This time they went out in a party of 12, and this time the plan was Urzoth's and Elijah's together, mapped on the flat table in their East Tower room over 2 evenings, with the same field accounts and the same working dynamic they had developed. Her reading the tactical angles, him reading the behavioral patterns, both of them testing the other's conclusions without politeness and arriving somewhere better than either had started. The hunt was 3 days in the high valley above the garrison. Cold in a way that was specific and total, the kind of cold that lives in your coat and your boots and the back of your neck at all times, that makes you aware of your own warmth as a resource. They camped in a lean-to at the valley's head, and Elijah made fire and Urzoth made a perimeter, and they ate trail food in the cold and talked, at length, about things that had nothing to do with wolves or tactics. She told him about her mother more than she had before, more specifically. About the training yard at the Burned River camp, where she had learned to fight as a child, following her mother's forms with focused young seriousness. About the last message she had received from her mother before the final weeks of the border skirmishes, a letter that had not said anything overtly significant but that she had recognized, even at 16, as the kind of thing a person writes when they are trying to say something real without alarming anyone. She had kept the letter. It was in a leather case in the East Tower room, with 2 others of equally personal weight. He told her about the years after his apprenticeship, the specific loneliness of a traveling life chosen for good reasons, sustained because it was useful, and quietly hollow in ways that you notice more as the years go on. The patient deaths that had stayed with him, not as failures but as presences because he was that kind of person. The way he had gradually let go of expecting to find someone who fit, not as a conscious decision, but as the slow relinquishment of things that seemed too complicated to want. And then, he said, you were in the yard fighting a post with your eyes closed, and I said something annoying about weight distribution. She was looking at the fire. The lean-to was warm by comparison to the outside, which was not warm but was warm. She had his coat across her lap, being practical about shared warmth, and his shoulder was against hers. And then, she said, and then. She put her head down on his shoulder briefly, not a gesture she made often, and when she made it, it meant the specific thing it meant. He put his arm around her. I am glad you said it, she said. The annoying thing about weight distribution. So am I. The wolves were found on the 2nd day, and driven off the valley in a hunt that went exactly as planned with the exception of a single moment, where one of the garrison's younger soldiers made a positional error and Urzoth was between the soldier and the lead wolf before anyone had processed the situation, which was, Elijah thought with a particular quality of feeling, very Urzoth, and also, watching it from 30 feet away, extremely alarming and absolutely characteristic. The wolf pack scattered. 2 were taken. The rest went back up the highland ridges, spooked and hungry and looking for easier ground, and the valley farmers could breathe again. They were 4 miles from the garrison, heading back in the cold gray afternoon, when they met a party of orc traders on the road clan-marked, from the eastern territories heading west. There were 6 of them, all male, with 2 laden wagons. They stopped when they saw Urzoth. Not with hostility recognition. One of the men said something in the old language, and Urzoth responded in kind, and there was a brief exchange that Elijah watched without understanding the words and with complete understanding of the tone. One of the traders looked at Elijah, said something to Urzoth with a specific cadence. Urzoth said something back and her voice was even, but the particular quality of her stillness had shifted. Then the trader laughed not unkindly and said something further, and Urzoth's stillness resolved back to its normal shape. When the traders had passed and the road was theirs again, Elijah said, "What did he say?" She rode in silence for a moment. "He asked if you were my contractor. And you said." "I said no." And then he laughed and said, "He said he could see that." She kept her eyes on the road. He used the word Kethevra. He could see the bead I am wearing. It is the facing bead. It is a custom. The one who wears it has spoken the claiming word. She paused. He said it suited me. Elijah looked at her. She was looking at the road, but the corner of her mouth was doing the thing. It does suit you, he said. She glanced over. The smile was there, the real one, the warm one, the one that was only for him. I know, she said. They came back to Ashfield Keep in the late afternoon with the mission complete and 3 days of cold in their bones and the particular satisfaction of work that was actually done, finished, solved, over. The garrison gate was open. The guard on duty waved them through. The yard was lit with torches against the early dark of winter. Halse met them at the stable. She got the report, brief and direct as Urzoth's reports always were, and she nodded once and said, "Good. Get warm. Supper in an hour." They unsaddled the horses side by side in the warm stable, working in the easy silence of two people who have done this together enough times that it has its own rhythm. Elijah's hands were cold from the road and he fumbled one of the buckles, and Urzoth reached over without a word and did it for him, efficiently, and went back to her own work. He watched her for a moment, the sure, competent hands, the familiar concentration, the bone bead at her collar that he now knew the meaning of. "Urzoth," he said, "I want to stay." She looked over. "Here," he said, "I mean the circuits, the contracts, all of that can continue, but as a base and as a home, a real one." He was saying this more haltingly than he usually said things to her, because it was the most direct he had yet been about the shape of the future, and he was aware that it was a large thing. "If that is what you want too." She looked at him for a long moment. The stable was warm with horse heat and hay and lantern light. Somewhere outside, someone in the garrison yard was laughing at something. "You said Kethevra on the road back from the river dispute," she said. "I know. That is," she turned back to the saddle, hanging it with precision on its peg. "That word means what it means, Elijah. It means the choice is made." She was quiet for a moment. "It is not a question of whether I want you to stay. You have already stayed." She turned back to face him. Her amber eyes were warm in the lantern light and completely steady. "I am saying I have already known this. For a while." He crossed the stable and kissed her, and she kissed him back with her hands still smelling of cold road and horse leather, and the lantern swung slightly in the draught from the door, and the garrison went about its evening around them. The marshcrawler they had killed in the autumn was gone. The boar was gone. The wolf pack was gone from the valley. The garrison was warm and staffed, and its sick soldiers were healthy, and its supply contracts were running, and the Greyfen road was passable for the first time in months. These things were true because two people with very different skills and very similar willingness to show up had worked alongside each other until the work was done. This was also true, that in the wreckage of the Highland Valley with the wolf hunt finished and the cold air full of their own relief laughter, they had turned to each other and laughed. At the soldier's positional error that Urzoth had fixed without thinking, at the wolf that had apparently reconsidered its life choices mid-charge, at Elijah's bolt that had gone very wide on the third shot and nearly struck a tree he was not aiming at. They had laughed in the field the way you laugh when the dangerous thing is over and you are standing in the same place, and the air is cold and clear and you are alive. And the laughter had the specific quality of people who are genuinely glad to be alive in the same moment, in the same place. It was, Elijah thought, the best laughter of his life. Some time later, weeks into the deep winter, when the snow had covered the garrison yard to knee-height and Gerard wore an extra blanket in the stable and Elijah had learned to braid reasonably well, and Urzoth had learned to drink the chamomile tea he made in the evenings with something that was not exactly enthusiasm, but was tolerant acceptance of a thing done with care. He stood at the east tower window with a cup of that tea and watched her in the yard below. She was training. It was before full dawn, the way it always was when she trained, and the yard was blue dark except for the torch at the gate and the lighter gray of the snow. She was working through a form he recognized, one of the more complex ones, a long sequence with many decision points, and her eyes were closed. He watched her move through it. The sure, unhurried efficiency of it, the weight correctly balanced now, both sides of the form equal. The correction she had made months ago settled so deeply into her body that it was simply how she moved. She struck. She pivoted. She guarded. She flowed from one position to the next with the particular quality of something that has been made right. Then she stopped. In the middle of the form she stopped, and she opened her eyes, and she turned and looked directly up at the East Tower window. At him. He did not know how she had known he was there. He suspected she had known for some time. He suspected, knowing her, that the form had been performed partly for him, which was not a thing she would ever say directly, but which was the kind of truth you learn to read in people you know entirely. He raised his cup, a small gesture, visible even in the blue winter dark. She looked up at him for a moment. Then she turned back to the yard and closed her eyes and continued the form. He watched her. He drank the tea. The garrison woke slowly around them, and the snow in the yard kept its blue-gray dark for another few minutes before the dawn came properly. And in that narrow time, with the cold air outside and the warm room behind him, and the sound of her feet on the frozen ground below, Elijah Chandler felt something settle in him that had been unsettled for as long as he could honestly remember. He thought about what she had said in the valley, with the fire between them and the cold outside, and her voice quiet and specific, and more honest than most people ever were about anything. I am done being alone. That is what it means for me. He had spent years traveling because the work was necessary, and the work was good, and he was genuinely suited to it. He had told himself honestly that the traveling life was a chosen thing and not a default, and mostly this had been true. But there is a difference between being alone by choice and being alone because you have not yet found the specific person who makes the choice feel different. He had found her in the rain, being wrong about her own weight distribution, in a stable yard at a crossroads inn, and he had said something about it because he could not help noticing true things, and she had looked at him with amber eyes and said, not exactly a compliment, and here they were. He stayed at the window until the form was finished. When she came back inside, her face cold from the yard air and her eyes warm from the training, she walked straight to where he was standing and took the cup from his hands, drank the last of the tea without asking, and handed it back. It was cold, he said. I know. I have been outside for an hour. She looked at him without distance or performance. You watched the whole form. I did. You have been learning the forms. You could track where I was in it. I could. She looked at him steadily. What did you see? That it was right, he said. The whole thing from the first position to the last. Right, he looked at her. No error. Urzoth looked at him for a moment. Then she took the cup from him and set it on the table and put both her hands on either side of his face with the deliberate, specific care she put into things that mattered to her. Good, she said. He put his hands over hers. The garrison outside was fully awake now, morning sounds coming through the stone walls, and the East Tower room was small and warm and full of field accounts and medicine packs, and a sword belt on a peg and a braid comb on the table. And the snow was still in the yard and the road was clear, and somewhere down the hall the cook was making something that smelled of bread and wood smoke and morning. I love you, he said. I know, she said. She was smiling, the real one. I love you too. She tilted her head and the bone bead clinked softly. Stop being sentimental and come eat. You have a patient at 7 and I am reviewing the spring contract proposals with House, and we have a great deal of work. You, he said, are the most romantic person I have met. I am practical, she said, and you are already late. He followed her out of the East Tower and into the corridor, and the morning was cold and full and completely, unambiguously theirs.